Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and there's that saying, the saying about being the change that you want to see in the world. And it's a good saying. It sounded like I was being snarky. I'm not being snarky. It's a good saying because, it fits with the teachings of Jesus, right? All of that stuff about the measure you use on others, it'll be used unto you, and the golden rule, and this stuff's in the Sermon on the Mount. Those are foundational kingdom values of Jesus. That's good stuff, and it's good stuff that is leaked out into the larger culture. One of the many ways that subtly the brilliant stuff from the Bible has seeped out into the larger consciousness and affected the world in very good ways. What I like about the be the change you want to see in the world idea is that you start with yourself. You think about your own heart, and implicit in that is the idea that you have the capacity to do screwed up stuff, but also the capacity to do beautiful and redemptive stuff. And so I like the way it starts small instead of always worrying about slaying the dragons without, you worry about slaying the dragons within. And the other impulse that I like about that saying very much is the pragmatic side, because it's very hard to change the world just from a practical get things done, how many hours are there in the day kind of perspective. It's very difficult to go and bring about gigantic sweeping change globally. And so sometimes it makes sense to take that in smaller chunks. And by sometimes, I mean almost all the time, it makes sense to take that in smaller chunks. And so when you start close to home, sometimes you might observe a big, giant problem that's a long way off. And maybe the best solution would be to go and bring about gigantic change, get a bunch of people with guns, get an army, make a coalition, go and fight great wars, heroism, and all of that giant stuff, and bring sweeping change to planet Earth. But most of the time, you got to be more practically minded, and you sort of have to be the change that you want to see in the world. You have to start much closer to home, not because it's the right principle, but because you only have so much reach. There's only so much you can actually get done. I think we run into one of those kind of situations here in Nehemiah as we get started on chapter 5, and we see that there's a gigantic justice crisis going on with the returning exiles who are rebuilding the wall. They're trying to get the wall built so they can go from being returning exiles to established and returned exiles. But all of the time and energy that it's taken to build the wall, it's shutting down all the businesses. It is creating economic chaos, economic instability. And we really haven't heard hide nor hair of any of that stuff up until chapter 5. But now that the external enemies are thwarted or held at bay, all of a sudden we get a little closer to home and we realize, dang, the workers are running out of steam. They are having trouble paying their bills. They're having trouble keeping it together. And that sounds, really, that's a very modest way of describing it. There are 3 levels of lament or outcry over the economic injustice and economic crisis that's piling up here. Number 1 is we don't have enough grain to eat and stay alive. That's objection 1 in Nehemiah 5:2. But the builders of the wall, the residents of Jerusalem who are rebuilding this under the temporary governorship of Nehemiah, they have another outcry as well here in verse 3. Others were saying, we're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Oh, whoa, hold on. So there's a famine? What terrible timing to try to rebuild this wall. That's very problematic. Now, famine, of course, is something that can be caused by fluky natural circumstances, weird outlier stuff that doesn't normally happen, isn't scheduled or predicted in the almanac. But famine can also, see 20th century communism, can also just be scheduled. It can be policy driven and intentional. In this case, we don't know exactly why we're having a famine, but oh, dang, there's a famine. And so people are taking great investments, like the stuff that is representative of generational household wealth, and they're cashing it out. One time I had a neighbor, and he had a tough time. He liked substances, and he was trying to kick it. And I knew that was his story, and I was rooting for him. As a kid that I talked to a lot, I knew he was in trouble one day when I went out, and I saw that the little beater car that he saved up money at his job at Domino's to buy to try to inch his way out of his very difficult predicament, he's out there with a Sawzall underneath it, cutting off his catalytic converter to try to scrap together $100 to solve whatever crisis it was. You and I, from the comfort of this conversation we're having, it's really easy for us to look at that and go, oh, dude, don't destroy your car to meet the needs of one day. But it kind of tells the story of how deeply he felt whatever crisis he was going through, whether it was addiction or just needing to pay bills or food or whatever was going on in his life. You feel that, oh, ouch, no. That's such a huge step backwards kind of pain when you see that from a distance. Well, I think Nehemiah's feeling that here with his people. No, don't sell your houses. I mean, we're building a wall to protect your houses. We're trying to get established here. That's the exact opposite of getting established. What is going on? This famine crept up on us. This is a much bigger deal than anybody realized. And then, of course, as we talked about yesterday, the third crisis economically of Nehemiah chapter 5 is that people aren't just selling their fields and their vineyards, generational wealth. They're selling off their kids. You ever see that picture? It makes the rounds on the internet once every year or so, and it's of the woman, the mom, hiding her face during the Great Depression. And she's literally got a hand-painted sign that says 3 kids for sale. And quite literally, she sold her kids. And the story of the photograph apparently is well known and how it all turned out. She couldn't feed them, and the crisis became so great that she literally sold them off so somebody else could take care of them. So at this point, we're not talking about parting ways with generational wealth and the inheritance. We're talking about parting ways with the people who would receive the inheritance, literally selling off the next generation. And some of what we read here, although we are the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we're powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. There's no way out. I've had some hard times. I'm guessing you have as well. But I'm guessing only a very small percentage of those of you who are hearing this can in any way relate to the kind of complete economic meltdown and just unsolvable crisis that we discover in 3 successive increasing in intensity waves through this passage. But did you catch the details there in that last little bit? Still others were saying, these are the people demanding justice, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. They're borrowing to pay taxes. Yikes. Although we're the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Wait a minute. This sounds like this is returning exile on returning exile crime because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. Yeah, who are they borrowing money from? They're mortgaging everything to their neighbors, their fellow countrymen? Whoa, wait a minute. Verse 6, Nehemiah says, when I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you're exacting usury from your own countrymen. Usury is interest. Now, that kind of lending practice was a thing that you would see in Greek culture. Normal lending practice, like what you're used to, where you lend somebody some money and you're like, pay me back 3% annually until it's paid off. That happened amongst the Persians as well. But the Jewish people weren't supposed to do this to each other. There was this whole idea of the year of Jubilee baked into who they were. Maybe we need to talk more about the year of Jubilee and the concepts of debt in the Old Testament amongst the Jewish people tomorrow. Yeah, we probably will. But the idea is this is an outrage to Nehemiah. And he's a temporary governor. He's there to do one thing, build a wall. He's not getting into all of the dirty details about the finances of everybody there. It looks like this is hitting him cold, and he probably assumed that there was some lending going on amongst the returning exiles, but with interest? Like the Greeks do? Like the Persians do? What are you doing? This is a complete departure from who we are. Do you guys not get the system here? Do you not get the moment that we're in? We're all coming together and we had a montage. We're like building walls and we're fixing things up, and you guys are trying to collect interest and squeeze out 5% from people? Do you guys think this is smart or a good idea? People are losing their homes. They're selling their kids into slavery. What are you doing? And obviously we're going to talk about how he responds to it and the problems with doing this in this context next time around. But there are 2 culprits here, going all the way back to the thing that we're talking about at the beginning, right? The king's taxes are clearly a very heavy burden. And also, locals, the richer people, are taking advantage of the poorer people, especially during this desperate and exceptional time. You got three big problems going on right now. You got the barbarians at the gate trying to kill you. You're trying to rebuild this wall, and everybody is suspending their jobs and their businesses, and you have a famine. And these guys are charging interest in a culture where historically you don't charge interest to each other. Yeah, it's pretty screwed up, and I see why Nehemiah would be angry. And so you and I might look at the situation and be like, well, you got to go you solve this thing with Artaxerxes. The taxes are too much. And look, I don't like taxes very much. I'm not a huge fan of that. It would seem natural to say, well, just write a letter to your buddy and ask him to lift this burden off of people. Yeah, but Nehemiah is pretty smart. One, he knows that would set a horrible precedent for the rest of the empire, and it's a bridge too far in terms of a personal request. You've already really extended your metaphorical credit with Artaxerxes. You can't go asking for that. And also, it would take forever, as we discussed yesterday, to even get a letter there and get any kind of relief. That isn't the quick way. So all the way back to the thing we're talking about at the beginning. What do you do here? Well, you start close to home. You be the change you want to see in the world. So instead of going after the government side of the economic crisis, you go after the private business side of the economic crisis in this situation, and you appeal to your own people to say, these practices are screwed up. They're wildly inappropriate in this time. You're not reading the room. This is not the time to get rich or to be opportunistic. We can most quickly relieve this pressure and solve this economic crisis by solving things with ourselves right now, in-house, with a conversation. And Nehemiah is going to demand that conversation and throw around the clout that he has to appeal to people to see if they can work out a better system to find some relief for all these people who are crumbling under the weight of this economic crisis. It's a tall order. Get between people and their money. It's going to get real weird. Let's see if Nehemiah is up to the challenge. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.